Welcome back to Midnight Affair Tales. Thank you for joining us. Chapter 1. Perfection. The Grand Mercer estate stood like an untouchable fortress, bathed in golden light against the dark Connecticut sky. Inside, a lavish anniversary party was in full swing. Laughter, expensive champagne, the hum of a live jazz band. Kingston Mercer, or simply King as everyone called him, held a glass of bourbon, the rich scent filling his lungs as he surveyed the room. His wife, Savannah, was the jewel of the evening, wrapped in an emerald silk gown that hugged her curves. She laughed at something a guest whispered in her ear, her polished fingers delicately grazing the rim of her champagne flute. To anyone watching, she was the perfect wife, the perfect queen to King's empire. But King had always known how to read between the lines. And tonight something felt off. It was the way Savannah's eyes darted, like she was looking for someone. The way her fingers clutched her phone a second too long before sliding it into her clutch. The scent of something unfamiliar clung to her skin, not his cologne. Someone else's. A slow, creeping sensation crawled up King's spine. He had built his empire on knowing when and how to strike. He never made a move without certainty. But was his queen betraying her king? The thought alone was absurd, wasn't it? He took another sip of bourbon, eyes locked on her from across the room. She hadn't noticed him watching. Not yet. What would she do if she knew the game had already begun? Chapter 2. Temptation. 1 week earlier. Savannah Mercer was never one to be reckless. But that changed the moment Dawson Hayes walked into her life. It had been a simple, forgettable moment. Her car had stalled at a gas station, annoying but fixable. And then he showed up, grease-stained hands, strong jaw, piercing green eyes. He wasn't like the men in her world, no polished suit, no expensive cologne. Just raw masculinity. Need some help? His voice was smooth, slightly rough at the edges. Savannah had meant to say no. But something inside her, something hungry, made her pause. He fixed her car in less than 5 minutes, but she lingered, making small talk, playing with the edges of her hair. It was harmless, wasn't it? But when he wiped his hands on a rag and looked at her, really looked at her, something shifted in her chest. "Guess I'll see you around," Dawson said with a small smirk before walking back into the shop. Savannah had stood there for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady her breath. She should have driven away. But instead, she found herself coming back the next day. Chapter 3. Secrets. Savannah had never known how easy it would be to lie. It started with little things. Telling King she was meeting a friend for lunch when she was really taking the long drive to Dawson's shop. Lingering a little too long when he brushed his fingers over her wrist, teasing her with something unspoken. She told herself it was just a game. Just harmless temptation. But then came the first kiss. It happened in the back of Dawson's garage, between the scent of oil and metal, his hands gripping her waist, her fingers tangled in his shirt. It was reckless. It was wrong. And yet, when he pulled away, she had only one thought. I want more. That night, as she lay in bed beside King, she felt the weight of her own deception. He had his arm draped over her waist, his breathing slow and steady. If he knew what she had done, what she was still doing, would he forgive her? Or would he destroy her? Chapter 4. Lies. Savannah sat at the marble vanity in her walk-in closet, brushing her hair in slow, deliberate strokes. Lies were like silk, smooth, dangerous, and easy to weave. She had perfected the art of deception. Her phone, face down on the counter, buzzed. King was downstairs in his study, likely poring over business reports or finalizing a deal that would make him millions. He wouldn't check on her. He trusted her. She turned the phone over. Dawson. D. Can't stop thinking about you. Her pulse quickened. She swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing herself to stay calm. This was dangerous. Every message, every stolen glance, every touch. It was building towards something uncontrollable. She deleted the text and placed her phone back on the counter. King's voice carried up the staircase. Savannah? She straightened her posture, applying a final touch of lipstick. A perfect wife. A perfect lie. Coming, darling, she called back, slipping her phone into her purse as she walked downstairs, her heart pounding in her chest. At dinner, King studied her carefully over his glass of bourbon. You seem distracted. Savannah forced a smile. Just tired. Long day. Where were you? His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't. Lunch with Paige, she answered smoothly, taking a sip of wine to mask her nerves. King nodded slowly, dragging his fingers along the rim of his glass. Strange. I ran into Paige today at the club. She said she hadn't seen you in weeks. A chill ran down Savannah's spine. She had made her first mistake. She laughed softly. Oh, I meant I was supposed to meet her. She canceled last minute, so I just shopped instead. King held her gaze a second too long. Then he smiled. Ah, that makes sense. Savannah let out a silent breath of relief. But she didn't notice the way King's smile didn't reach his eyes. He was testing her. And she had just failed. Chapter 5. Suspicions. King was a man who built empires. He understood power, control, and strategy. And he knew when he was being played. Something was wrong with Savannah. The woman who once adored him, the woman who once kissed him without reason, who laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, had changed. Her touch was calculated. Her kisses were routine. Her body was there, but her mind? Somewhere else. And that, more than anything, infuriated him. He never lost. Never. Which is why the next morning he made a call. Follow her, he told the private investigator. Everywhere she goes. I want details. I want proof. The investigator hesitated. Are you sure, Mr. Mercer? Sometimes, people find things they don't want to know. King's jaw tightened. There was nothing he feared. Find the truth, he ordered. And bring it to me. Later that evening, Savannah was in their bathroom, applying perfume when her phone buzzed. She picked it up, expecting Dawson's name to appear. But instead it was an unknown number. Unknown. Does your husband know? Her breath hitched. No. This wasn't happening. Her fingers trembled as she typed back. Who is this? No reply. Just silence. A creeping sense of dread wrapped around her throat. Someone knew. And if someone knew, how long before King found out? What happens when secrets start unraveling? Don't miss the next chapter. Keep reading to find out. Chapter 6. Discovery. 3 days later, King received the photos. A thick envelope sat on his desk. He didn't need to open it to know what was inside. But he did anyway. One by one he pulled them out. Savannah. Dawson. Together. A cheap motel parking lot. A stolen kiss in a car. Her hand in his. The look in her eyes, that unmistakable hunger she had once reserved for him. King placed the photos down carefully, fingers pressing against the paper. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. Anger was useless without strategy. He had given Savannah everything. A life of wealth, power, and security. He had worshipped her, adored her. And in return she had given her body to a commoner. Slowly, methodically, King picked up his phone and made another call. Dawson Hayes, he said to his associate. I want everything on him. His finances. His business. His weaknesses. Pause. Then, understood, Mr. Mercer. What do you want done? King exhaled slowly, his lips curling into a smile. Destroy him. Chapter 7. Deception. The night was colder than usual, the sharp Connecticut air slicing through Savannah's thin silk blouse as she stepped out of her car. The parking lot behind Dawson's auto shop was dark, secluded, the perfect place for secrets to live and breathe. She had told herself 1,000 times that this would be the last time. That she'd walk away. That she'd erase Dawson from her life and pretend none of this had ever happened. Yet here she was again. Dawson was waiting for her by the garage entrance, his arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips as if he already knew she couldn't stay away. You're late, he said. She rolled her eyes, stepping closer. I wasn't even sure I was coming. But you did. His voice was low, rough, tinged with something that sent shivers up her spine. Savannah sighed, running a hand through her hair. This is insane. Dawson stepped forward, brushing his fingers against her wrist, his touch igniting something deep inside her. Yeah. Then why do you keep coming back? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because the truth was, this wasn't just about lust anymore. It wasn't just about escaping the gilded cage King had built for her. It was about feeling alive. Dawson tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. You're not happy with him, Savannah? Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell Dawson that he was wrong. But the words refused to come. Because deep down she knew the truth. She hadn't been happy in a long, long time. And she had no idea what to do about it. Chapter 8. Betrayal. King sat in his office, the heavy scent of bourbon filling the room. The photos lay spread across his desk, mocking him, taunting him. Savannah. Is Savannah. The woman he had built a kingdom for. The woman he had loved with every piece of his soul. The woman who had turned around and betrayed him for a man who was nothing. King exhaled slowly, picking up one of the photos. Dawson Hayes. A nobody. A filthy mechanic who had the audacity to touch what belonged to him. King had built his empire from the ground up. He had clawed his way to the top with blood and sweat, crushing anyone who stood in his way. And yet, this man, this nothing, thought he could take his wife from him? A slow, dangerous smile spread across King's lips. No. He wouldn't just end the affair. He wouldn't just confront Savannah and demand answers. That would be too easy. Too merciful. No, King Mercer didn't believe in mercy. He believed in destruction. And Savannah was about to learn what it truly meant to betray a king. He picked up his phone, dialing a number he rarely used. Mr. Mercer. The voice on the other end was sharp, professional. I have a problem, King said calmly. A problem? King's fingers tightened around the glass in his hand. A man named Dawson Hayes. I want his life burned to the ground. I want him ruined. I want him to suffer. Pause. Then. Consider it done. King hung up, exhaling slowly. This was only the beginning. Savannah thought she had played him. Thought she had won. She had no idea that the game had just begun. Chapter 9, Pawn. Dawson should have known better. He had seen the warning signs. The way Savannah's hands trembled when she pulled him into the garage that night. The way her eyes darted around as if she was being watched. Something wasn't right. And now, as he stood in the middle of his shop, staring at the foreclosure notice taped to the door, he knew. King Mercer had found out. And he was coming for him. Dawson's stomach twisted. He had been in dangerous situations before, had tangled with the wrong people more times than he could count. But this was different. Because King wasn't just coming after him. He was erasing him. His bank accounts? Frozen. His suppliers? Refusing to work with him. His customers? Nowhere to be found. Everything he had worked for, gone overnight. Panic clawed at his throat. He had underestimated King. He had thought this was just about a cheating wife and a broken marriage. But King wasn't a man who got cheated on. He was a man who punished. Dawson pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he typed out a message to Savannah. Do we need to talk? No. Minutes passed. No reply. Then an hour. Then 2. Dawson paced the length of his shop, running a hand through his hair. He had always been a fighter. A survivor. But this time? He wasn't sure if he was going to make it out alive. Chapter 10. Revelation. Savannah stared at her phone, her heart hammering in her chest. Dawson's message burned into her mind. We need to talk. No. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Sense it. She wanted to call him. To go to him. To tell him that everything was going to be okay. But the moment she reached for her purse, King's voice sliced through the room. Going somewhere? Savannah froze. King stood in the doorway of their bedroom, his face unreadable. But his eyes were burning. She forced a smile. Just stepping out for a bit? King nodded slowly, stepping closer. And where exactly would you be going at this hour? Savannah's pulse pounded. Nowhere important. King's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile playing at the edges. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was a warning. Good, he said, brushing a hand down her arm. Because I'd hate to think you were keeping secrets from me. Savannah swallowed hard. King leaned in, pressing a slow kiss to her forehead. Get some rest, darling, he whispered. You look exhausted. Savannah held her breath as he pulled away, watching as he turned and walked out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, her knees buckled. She had to get out. She had to warn Dawson. Because if King knew, if he had already started playing his game, then it was already too late. Chapter 11, Exile. Savannah had never felt fear like this before. She had spent years playing the role of the perfect wife, polished, poised, and untouchable. But now, as she crept through the darkened Mercer estate, her hands shaking, her heart pounding, she felt like a prisoner trying to escape before the executioner caught her. King knew. She didn't need proof. She could feel it in the way he had looked at her tonight. In the slow, deliberate way he had spoken. He knew everything. She grabbed her keys and slipped on her coat, every step towards the front door feeling heavier than the last. She had to get to Dawson. Had to warn him. Had to. The moment she reached for the door handle, a deep voice cut through the silence. Going somewhere? Savannah's entire body went cold. King. He was sitting in the shadows near the staircase, a glass of bourbon in his hand, watching her like a predator watching its prey. Late night drive? He asked casually, taking a slow sip. Or were you planning to disappear? Savannah forced herself to breathe. I just needed some air. King hummed, standing up. That's funny. Because you don't look like a woman who just wants air. You look like a woman running. Savannah's throat tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. King set his glass down on the marble table beside him, his movements slow, controlled. Dangerous. I know everything, Savannah. Her pulse skyrocketed. King stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't see the way you looked at him? He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. I built this empire by knowing every move people make before they even think of making it. And you? His voice dropped to a whisper. You were predictable. Savannah's hands clenched into fists. I never meant to hurt you. King tilted his head. No? His expression darkened. But you did. And now you're going to pay for it? Savannah barely had time to react before two of King's security guards appeared behind her. Escort my wife out, King said smoothly. She no longer belongs in this house. The breath left Savannah's lungs. King? You made your choice, he cut her off coldly. Now live with it. Before she could fight back, the guards grabbed her by the arms and dragged her out the front door. The bitter night air hit her skin like ice as she stumbled onto the driveway. The heavy doors slammed shut behind her. For the first time in her life, Savannah Mercer had nothing. And she had no one to blame but herself. Chapter 12, Isolation. Savannah had never been truly alone before. From the moment she had married King, she had been surrounded by wealth, luxury, and influence. She had been the wife of one of the most powerful men in the country. People admired her, respected her. But now she was just another woman with a suitcase and nowhere to go. She sat in her car, parked on the side of a desolate road, staring at her phone. She had called everyone, her friends, her mother, even her old college roommate. No one answered. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had betrayed Kingston Mercer. She wiped at the tears slipping down her cheek, forcing herself to stay strong. She wasn't weak. She still had Dawson. Savannah put the car in drive, heading straight for his apartment. You would take her in. You would understand. But when she arrived and knocked on his door, no one answered. She knocked again. Harder. Still nothing. Her stomach twisted. Where was he? Panic clawed at her throat as she pulled out her phone and dialed his number. The line had been disconnected. Savannah's breath hitched. No, this wasn't happening. She drove to his shop next, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. But when she pulled up, she froze. The shop was abandoned. The windows were boarded up. A foreclosure notice was plastered to the front door. Savannah stepped out of the car in a daze, her legs trembling. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. King had erased him. Savannah turned in circles, looking around as if Dawson would appear. As if he'd step out from the shadows and tell her it was all some horrible misunderstanding. But the street was empty. Dawson Hayes was gone. And Savannah Mercer had never felt so alone. Chapter 13, Desperation. Savannah didn't remember how she got to the motel. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely insert the key into the rusted lock. The room was damp, smelling of mildew and regret. The walls were thin enough that she could hear the couple in the next room arguing over money. This was her reality now. A cheap motel on the outskirts of town, paid for with the last of the cash she had in her purse. She collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. How had this happened? Just days ago, she had been living in luxury, wearing designer gowns, drinking expensive wine, sleeping on Egyptian cotton sheets. And now she was nothing. She sat up suddenly, grabbing her phone. There was only one person left to call. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a long moment before she finally pressed dial. After 3 rings, a voice answered. Savannah. She closed her eyes, gripping the sheets beneath her. Mama, she whispered. Silence. Then, I can't help you. Savannah flinched. Please. I don't have anywhere to go. You made your bed, her mother said quietly. Now lie in it. The line went dead. Savannah dropped the phone onto the bed, her chest tightening with panic. There was no one left. No family. No friends. No Dawson. King had made sure of it. And now, as she sat in the darkness, wrapped in nothing but her own regret, she finally understood the depth of her mistake. She had underestimated her husband. She had played with fire. And now she was burning. Chapter 14. Bankrupt. The motel room was suffocating. The air was stale, the dim yellow bulb flickering like it too was giving up. Savannah sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, staring at her bank account on her phone screen. Balance, $0. Her hands clenched into fists. She had expected King to freeze their joint accounts. She wasn't stupid. But she hadn't expected this. Her personal account, her hidden savings, every single financial resource she had, gone. Erased. King had always been powerful, but she had underestimated just how far his reach extended. Savannah gritted her teeth, scrolling through her contacts. Every number felt useless. Who would help her now? She tried calling an old friend from college. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hello? Jenna, it's me, Savannah said, relief washing over her. I need help. A long pause. Then, Savannah, I can't. I'm sorry. Please don't call me again. Click. Savannah let out a breathless laugh, her head spinning. Was this real? Had King truly turned everyone against her so easily? She needed cash. Fast. Her gaze darted toward the small silver bracelet on her wrist. A Tiffany's original, a gift from King on their first anniversary. It was the only valuable thing she had left. She grabbed her coat and walked out of the motel, the night air biting at her skin. She found a pawn shop 2 blocks away, the neon "We Buy Gold" sign buzzing in the darkness. The man behind the counter took one look at the bracelet and smirked. Nice piece. How much? She asked, ignoring the way her voice cracked. The man studied it, then shrugged. $200. Savannah's stomach twisted. $200? That bracelet was worth at least 10 grand. Fine, she whispered. The man peeled off a few wrinkled bills and slid them across the counter. Savannah grabbed them and walked out. $200. That was what her life was worth now. And she had no one to blame but herself. Chapter 15. Hunted. Savannah didn't return to the motel right away. She walked, the streets cold and empty, the city unfamiliar without the luxury of chauffeured rides and 5-star restaurants. She was invisible now. A nobody. She turned a corner and stopped. A black SUV was parked across the street. It hadn't been there when she left. Her pulse quickened. Coincidence? Maybe. But Savannah had lived with King long enough to know that he didn't believe in coincidences. She kept walking, forcing herself to stay calm. But as she moved, so did the SUV. Panic tightened in her chest. No. She ducked into a side alley, pressing her back against the cold brick wall. She held her breath, listening. A car door opened. Heavy footsteps echoed down the pavement. Savannah's mind screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Then a voice. Familiar. Savannah. She turned slowly. King stood at the entrance of the alley, his black coat blending into the shadows. He looked calm. Too calm. Enjoying life on the other side? He asked, tilting his head. Savannah swallowed. What do you want? King stepped closer. I want you to understand something. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. You've already lost everything, Savannah. But I can make things worse. She took the paper with shaking hands and unfolded it. Her mother's address. Her breath hitched. You wouldn't? King's smile was sharp. I wouldn't? He leaned in, his voice dangerously soft. I gave you everything. And you threw it away for a filthy mechanic. So now I take everything from you? Savannah's heart pounded. Her mother had nothing to do with this. King, please, she whispered. This is between us. His eyes darkened. This is between you and the consequences of your actions. Savannah's hands curled into fists. She had never hated him more. King stepped back, his expression unreadable. I'll give you a choice, he said. Leave town. Tonight. Disappear. And I'll leave your mother alone. Savannah's breath caught. Leave. Run away. With nothing? King smiled, knowing exactly what she was thinking. Or stay. And watch everything you love burn. Then he turned and walked back to the SUV. Savannah stood frozen, the paper clenched in her hand. She had to make a choice. And she didn't have much time. Chapter 16. Betrayed. Savannah sat in the motel room, staring at the walls, her mind spinning. Leave town. Disappear. Or stay and risk King's wrath destroying more than just her life. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She grabbed it, hope flaring in her chest. Dawson. She answered immediately. Dawson? His voice was cold. Distant. You need to stop calling me. Savannah's stomach dropped. What? I mean it, Dawson said, his tone void of any emotion. We're done, Savannah. Whatever we had, it's over. Savannah's throat tightened. You don't mean that? Yes, I do. She shook her head, gripping the phone tighter. Dawson, please. You know what King is capable of. I know exactly what he's capable of, Dawson snapped. That's why I'm getting the hell away from this mess. And you should too. Savannah's breath came in short, sharp gasps. I don't understand. King warned me. Dawson's voice was flat. Said if I ever saw you again I'd regret it. And you know what? He's right. I should have never gotten involved with you. Savannah's chest ached. You're lying. You care about me? A long silence. Then. I did. His voice was quiet. But I care about staying alive more. Tears burned Savannah's eyes. Please? Goodbye, Savannah. The line went dead. She stared at her phone, her body numb. King had won. He had taken her home, her money, her friends. And now he had taken Dawson too. A deep, hollow rage built inside her. She had made mistakes, yes. But King had made a mistake too. He had underestimated her. Savannah wiped her tears, her hands steady. She wasn't leaving town. She wasn't running. She was going to fight. Chapter 17. Consequences. Savannah sat in her car, parked outside Dawson's shop. She needed to see him. Face to face. Her pulse pounded as she stepped out into the cold night, the air thick with the scent of rain. The shop was dark, abandoned, a hollow shell of what it once was. The sign above the garage door was gone, and a foreclosure notice was plastered against the window. Dawson was truly erased. Her stomach twisted as she walked toward the back alley, her heels crunching against the gravel. A figure stood there, smoking a cigarette, shoulders tense. Dawson. Relief hit her like a wave, until she saw his face. His lip was busted, his cheekbone swollen and bruised. There was a cut on his eyebrow, dried blood smeared across his skin. Savannah gasped. Oh my God, what happened to you? Dawson scoffed, shaking his head. You really have to ask? Her heart clenched. King? Dawson took a slow drag of his cigarette before exhaling. You don't get it, do you? He doesn't just ruin people, Savannah. He erases them. His voice was edged with anger, but there was something else beneath it. Fear. Savannah reached for him, but he pulled back. I told you we're done, he said. And I meant it. Savannah's throat tightened. Dawson, please? He made me choose, Savannah. Dawson's voice cracked, his hands balling into fists. Either I disappear or I die. And he inhaled sharply, his body trembling. I can't fight him. I won't. Savannah's stomach dropped. Dawson had always been the strong one, the fearless one. But now, he was broken. She stepped closer. We can take him down together. Dawson laughed bitterly, flicking his cigarette onto the ground. There is no together, Savannah. You still don't understand, do you? He's already won. Savannah clenched her fists. Note her voice was steady, firm. Not yet. Dawson sighed, running a hand through his hair. You need to leave before he kills you. I'm not running. Dawson let out a heavy breath. Then you're a fool. Silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Finally he shook his head. Goodbye, Savannah. And just like that he walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Savannah stood frozen, her heart shattered, her mind racing. King had taken everything from her. But he had just made a fatal mistake. He left her alive. And that was going to cost him everything. Chapter 18. Regret. Savannah knew there was only one person who could help her now. But she also knew it might be a mistake. Still, she had no choice. She scrolled through her contacts, found the number and pressed call. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. I was wondering when you'd call, the man said. Savannah gritted her teeth. Hello, Jackson. Jackson Reed had once been King's right-hand man. A ruthless fixer who handled problems quietly and efficiently. But 3 years ago, King had betrayed him, cut him out of the empire, left him to rot. And Jackson had never forgotten. "Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again, Princess," Jackson said, his voice laced with amusement. "Last I checked, you were too busy playing house with the king." "I need your help," Savannah admitted, hating how desperate she sounded. Jackson laughed. "Now that's interesting. What makes you think I'd help you?" Savannah took a deep breath. "Because King ruined me. Just like he ruined you." Silence. "Then, meet me at the Hollow. Midnight." "And Savannah?" She swallowed. "Yeah? Don't get any ideas. If you screw me over, I'll make sure you regret it." The line went dead. Savannah set the phone down, her hands trembling. She was making a deal with a man who had once been more feared than King himself. But fear didn't matter anymore. Revenge did. Chapter 19, Broken. The Hollow was the kind of place where deals were made in whispers and promises were sealed in blood. Savannah walked in, her coat pulled tightly around her, her eyes scanning the dimly lit bar. Smoke curled in the air, the scent of whiskey and bad decisions thick around her. Jackson sat in the back booth, one arm draped over the worn leather seat. His sharp blue eyes locked onto hers the moment she approached. She slid into the seat across from him, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "Look at you," Jackson mused, swirling his drink. "From the Mercer mansion to a dive bar. That must sting." Savannah didn't flinch. "I don't have time for your games." Jackson smirked. "That's funny. Because last I checked, you were the queen of playing games." She exhaled slowly. "Are you going to help me or not?" Jackson studied her for a long moment, then leaned forward. "Tell me, Savannah, what exactly do you want?" Her pulse pounded. "I want King to pay," she whispered. Jackson's smirk widened. "Now that is something I can get behind." He set his glass down and pulled out a file, sliding it across the table. Savannah hesitated before opening it. Inside were documents, photos, records, proof. King wasn't just a businessman. He was a man with secrets. Dirty money. Illegal deals. Crimes that could bury him. Savannah's breath caught. "Where did you get this?" Jackson chuckled. "I used to be his right hand, remember?" He leaned back. "The real question is, do you have the guts to use it?" Savannah traced her fingers over the documents, her mind racing. This was her chance. Her only chance. She looked up, her eyes hard. "I do." Jackson grinned. "Then let's burn the king's kingdom to the ground." Chapter 20, Madness. Savannah stood in the middle of her motel room, the stolen documents spread out on the bed. She had spent years living in King's shadow, playing by his rules. But now she was rewriting the game. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number. A woman's voice answered. "Hello?" Savannah's grip tightened on the receiver. "Detective Marshall? I have information about Kingston Mercer." A beat of silence. Then, "Who is this?" Savannah took a deep breath. "Someone who wants to see him fall." Another pause. Then, "Meet me at City Hall. Noon tomorrow." Savannah hung up, her hands shaking. This was it. The moment she turned over this evidence, King's empire would start to crumble. Her phone buzzed. A text. "Unknown number, you're making a mistake." A chill ran down her spine. Was it King? One of his men? Savannah's fingers hovered over the screen before she deleted the message. She had made mistakes before. But this wasn't one of them. This was justice. This was revenge. And once the world knew what kind of monster King really was, there would be no coming back. Pause here. Dear good listeners. A lot of people listen to the story but only 9% subscribe. I work hard to bring you amazing stories every day. This time, my goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers this week. And we are too close to achieving it. So, my awesome audience, show some love. Hit that subscribe button now. Let's continue our story. Chapter 21, Whispers. The night air was sharp as Savannah walked toward City Hall, her pulse pounding against her ribs. She had barely slept. The weight of what she was about to do sat heavy on her shoulders. Once she handed over the documents, there would be no turning back. Every step echoed in the silence as she entered the government building. The halls were empty except for a single light illuminating a small office at the end of the corridor. Detective Marshall was waiting. Savannah stepped inside. The detective, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp gray eyes and a no-nonsense expression, sat behind a cluttered desk. "You have exactly 5 minutes," Marshall said, motioning for Savannah to sit. Savannah reached into her bag and pulled out the folder, placing it on the desk. "This is everything. Offshore accounts, bribery, money laundering, illegal business dealings. If you take this to the right people, King's empire will crumble." Marshall flipped through the documents, her eyes narrowing. "Where did you get these?" Savannah hesitated. "A former associate of his?" Marshall's gaze locked onto hers. "Jackson Reed?" Savannah's stomach dropped. She knew. "Listen," Marshall said, leaning forward. "You think you're the first person who's tried to bring down Kingston Mercer? I've had 5 informants before you, and all of them either disappeared or backed out at the last second." Savannah clenched her fists. "I'm not backing out." The detective studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're playing a dangerous game." Savannah's voice was steady. "I don't care." Marshall exhaled through her nose. "I'll look into it. But if this goes south, you're on your own." Savannah nodded, standing. "I know." As she stepped out of the office, the shadows in the hallway felt heavier. Something was coming. And she had no idea if she'd survive it. Chapter 22, Resurgence. The city lights blurred through the motel window as Savannah poured herself a glass of whiskey. The waiting was the worst part. She had given Marshall the evidence. Now all she could do was hope. Her phone buzzed. "Jackson. You did it?" he asked when she answered. Savannah took a slow sip. "Yeah." Jackson let out a low whistle. "Balls a move, princess. You just declared war on the most powerful man in this city?" She leaned against the dresser, pressing her fingers to her temple. "King already ruined me. What else does he have left to take?" Jackson laughed. "Oh, sweetheart. You have no idea." Before she could respond, there was a loud bang at her door. Savannah's heart stopped. Jackson's voice sharpened. "What the hell was that?" Another bang. Then a voice. Cold. Familiar. "Open the door, Savannah." "King." Savannah's blood ran cold. She clutched the phone. "Jackson? I'm on my way." "Stall him." The line went dead. Savannah took a shaky breath, stepping toward the door. She unlatched it but didn't open it all the way. King stood there, his black coat perfectly tailored, his face carved from stone. His eyes burned. "You've been busy," he said, voice calm but dangerous. Savannah swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about." King's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's not play games." He stepped forward, forcing her to step back. The door creaked open further, and he walked inside like he still owned her. His presence suffocated the room. Savannah forced herself to stand tall. "You can't scare me." King chuckled. "Savannah." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't need to scare you. You're already afraid." Her breath hitched. He leaned in. "Too close. You have no idea what you've done." Then he turned and walked out. As soon as the door shut, Savannah collapsed onto the bed, her entire body shaking. She had won the first battle. But the war had just begun. Chapter 23, Confrontation. The next morning, Savannah woke to a sharp knock at her door. She bolted upright, her heart still racing from the night before. She grabbed the small knife she had tucked under the pillow, just in case. When she cracked open the door, Jackson stood there, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. "You look like hell," he said. Savannah let him in. "King was here last night?" Jackson's expression darkened. "Did he touch you?" "No," she said, gripping her arms. "But he wanted me to know that he knows." Jackson muttered a curse under his breath. "This isn't gonna be as easy as you think, sweetheart." Savannah clenched her fists. "I don't need easy. I just need to win." Jackson studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Then let's talk strategy." They sat at the small table, spreading out the documents once more. Jackson pointed at a particular name. "Sebastian Cole," he said. "He's King's biggest business partner. If we take him down, King loses half of his funding." Savannah nodded. "How do we get to him?" Jackson smirked. "Leave that to me." Savannah exhaled. "And King?" Jackson's smirk faded. "King isn't just any enemy, Savannah. He's a viper. And he's watching everything." Savannah swallowed the lump in her throat. She had no choice. She had to stay ahead of him. Jackson leaned back. "Are you ready for this?" Savannah met his gaze. "I was born ready." Chapter 24, Karma. The sky outside was dark, A storm rolling in over the city as Savannah stared out the motel window. The wind howled against the glass, mirroring the chaos inside her. Jackson had left hours ago, promising he'd take the first steps toward dismantling King's empire. But Savannah knew better than to rely on promises. She had to act too. She picked up her phone and dialed the only number that might still give her a lifeline. A familiar voice answered. Savannah? Her chest tightened. Paige. One of the few friends she had left, if she could even call her that. I need your help, Savannah whispered. Pause. Then, Savannah, I can't get involved. Savannah closed her eyes. Paige, please. I have no one else. A heavy sigh came through the line. What do you want? Savannah hesitated. I need a place to stay. Just for a few days. Jesus, Savannah. Paige's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you even realize what you've done? King's been everywhere. He's looking for you. People are terrified to even say your name. Savannah's grip tightened around the phone. Good. Let them be afraid. I just need time, she pleaded. Another long silence. Then finally Paige exhaled. I'll send you an address. But if King finds out, I'll deny everything. Savannah nodded, her body sagging with relief. Thank you. She hung up and grabbed her bag. The storm outside raged as she stepped into the night. But the real storm was just beginning. Chapter 25, Backfire. Paige's apartment was in a quiet part of town, tucked away from the prying eyes of King's men. Savannah knocked twice, her heart hammering in her chest. The door opened slightly and Paige peeked out. Her once perfectly styled blonde hair was disheveled, her expression wary. Get in, she hissed, yanking Savannah inside before slamming the door shut. Savannah took in the space. Minimalist, clean yet filled with tension. Paige turned, crossing her arms. You look like hell. Savannah let out a bitter laugh. I feel worse. Paige sighed, running a hand through her hair. What's your plan, Savannah? Because if you think you can outplay King, you're insane. Savannah straightened. I don't have a choice. Paige shook her head. You don't understand. He's already one step ahead of you. Savannah's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Paige hesitated, then grabbed her laptop and opened an article. She turned the screen toward Savannah. Savannah's breath caught. It was a headline. Ex-Mrs. Mercer under investigation. Fraud allegations surface? She snatched the laptop, reading the details. Fake accounts. Money laundering. Claims that Savannah had stolen from King's business. All fabricated but all damning. Her blood turned ice cold. He's framing me, she whispered. Paige nodded grimly. King isn't just ruining your reputation. He's making sure you can't come back from this. Savannah felt her world tilt. She had been so focused on taking him down, she hadn't realized he was already burying her. But if King thought she was going to crawl away and disappear, he was wrong. She was done being afraid. It was time to strike back. Chapter 26, Shadows. Savannah barely slept. The weight of King's latest move pressed down on her like a vice, but she refused to break. By morning she had a plan. Jackson called just as she was pouring herself a cup of coffee. We have a problem, he said. Savannah exhaled. No kidding? I mean a real problem, Jackson continued. The people I was supposed to meet with last night? Gone. Vanished. No trace. Savannah stiffened. King? Who the hell else? Jackson growled. Listen, Savannah. This isn't just about revenge anymore. You need to disappear before he... A sharp knock at the door. Savannah's blood ran cold. Jackson, someone's here. Do not open it, he ordered. Savannah's hand hovered over the doorknob. What if it's... The door burst open. Two men in black suits stepped inside, their faces blank. Savannah stumbled backward, heart hammering in her chest. Miss Mercer, one of them said, his voice eerily calm. Mr. Mercer would like to have a word. Savannah's mind raced. Paige. Where was Paige? Where's my friend? She demanded. The second man smirked. She's safe. For now. Savannah swallowed hard. She had no choice. She grabbed her phone and, with a shaking hand, typed out a single word to Jackson. Help. Then she followed them out the door. Chapter 27, Justice. The car ride was silent. The two men sitting in the front seats didn't speak, didn't acknowledge Savannah beyond forcing her into the back of the sleek, black vehicle. Her pulse hammered as she stared out the tinted window, the city blurring past. She had made a mistake. She had underestimated King, again. The car slowed as they approached a secluded mansion on the outskirts of the city, far from Mercer's estate but just as imposing. The moment they pulled through the gates, Savannah's chest tightened. This wasn't about scaring her anymore. King was going to end this one way or another. The moment the car stopped, the doors unlocked with a soft click. The men got out first, one of them holding the door open for her. Savannah inhaled sharply and stepped out. King was waiting. He stood at the entrance of the grand estate, dressed in a dark suit, the cold night air barely ruffling his perfectly styled hair. His eyes locked onto hers with the intensity of a predator who had caught his prey. "Savannah." His voice was smooth, controlled. Too controlled. She lifted her chin, forcing steel into her voice. "What is this, King? Another intimidation game?" He tilted his head slightly, then turned on his heel. "Come inside." Savannah hesitated. "Or," King said, glancing over his shoulder, "I can have my men drag you in." "Your choice." She clenched her fists and followed. Inside, the mansion was just as cold as its owner, modern, pristine, yet lacking warmth. King walked into a spacious living room and motioned for her to sit. She remained standing. He sighed. "Always so difficult." Savannah crossed her arms. "What do you want?" King took a seat on the couch, his posture relaxed. "To remind you who I am." Her stomach nodded. "I know exactly who you are." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "No, you don't. If you did, you never would have gone to the police." Savannah's breath caught. He knew. She tried to keep her face neutral, but King saw through her. "Detective Marshall is a smart woman," he said, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. "But not smart enough." Savannah's mouth went dry. "What did you do?" King smirked. "I took care of it." A chill ran down her spine. "You can't buy the law," she whispered. King chuckled. "Oh, Savannah. I don't buy the law. I own it." Her blood turned to ice. Everything, the documents, the evidence, the months of careful planning, all of it had been erased with a single move. She had nothing left. King leaned forward, his expression darkening. "I'll give you one last chance, Savannah. Walk away. Disappear. Take my money, take the out I'm giving you." Savannah's entire body tensed. "And if I don't?" His smirk vanished. "Then I destroy you. Completely." She had never feared him more than she did in that moment. But fear wouldn't save her. She had to think. She had to be smarter. So she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and did the only thing she could. She laughed. King's brow lifted, slightly amused but mostly annoyed. "Something funny?" Savannah met his gaze, fire burning in her eyes. "Yeah, you." She stepped forward, placing her hands on the table between them. "You think you've won, King?" she whispered. "You haven't even seen me fight yet." His expression darkened. "Careful, Savannah." She leaned in, her voice unwavering. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." His jaw tightened. For the first time she saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Good. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. Chapter 28, Coup. Savannah was escorted out of the mansion, but she walked on her own terms. The moment she stepped into the cold night, her mind raced. She had lost this battle, but the war? The war was still hers to win. She pulled out her phone and dialed. Jackson picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you're not dead." "I'm not," she breathed, rushing toward the main road. But King just made his biggest mistake. Jackson snorted. "Yeah. And what's that?" Savannah smiled grimly. "He gave me time." Jackson was silent for a moment before he chuckled. "Damn. You really don't know how to quit?" "No," Savannah whispered. "I don't." She heard Jackson shift on the other end of the line. "Then I hope you're ready, Princess. Because we're about to hit him where it hurts." Savannah's stomach twisted with anticipation. "What do you have?" Jackson sighed dramatically. "Let's just say I have a few friends who would love to see King Mercer burn." Savannah's heartbeat quickened. "How soon?" "Soon." Jackson's tone was serious now. "But we have to be careful. King is going to be watching you like a hawk." Savannah smirked. "Then let's give him something to watch." This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about destruction. Chapter 29, Legacy. By the next morning, Savannah was ready. She met Jackson at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The moment she stepped inside, she knew she wasn't alone. Several men sat around a long table, their faces hardened, their eyes sharp. Jackson grinned. Savannah Mercer, meet the people who hate your ex-husband as much as you do. Savannah swallowed. Who are they? Jackson shrugged. Business rivals. People he screwed over. People who would love to see him fall. One of the men, a tall, intimidating figure with dark eyes, leaned forward. We hear you want revenge. Savannah lifted her chin. I want justice. The man smirked. Same thing. Jackson leaned back, arms crossed. So, Savannah, what's the plan? Savannah exhaled slowly, her mind already calculating. She had lost everything. She had nothing left to lose. Which meant King Mercer was about to lose everything too. She met their gazes, steel in her voice. We take his kingdom, she said. And we burn it to the ground? The men exchanged glances. Then one by one they nodded. Savannah clenched her fists. It was time for the real war to begin. Chapter 30 Showdown. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back now. Savannah sat at the head of the long wooden table in the dimly lit warehouse, surrounded by men who once feared and obeyed King Mercer. Now they were her allies. Her army. Jackson leaned against the wall, arms crossed. All right, princess. You've got everyone's attention. What's the next move? Savannah looked around the room. These weren't just businessmen. These were powerful enemies King had underestimated, just like he had underestimated her. She took a breath. King's power isn't just in his money. It's in his reputation. The moment the world sees him as weak, he's finished. The man sitting across from her, Sebastian Cole, one of King's former business partners, smirked. You mean humiliation? Savannah nodded. Humiliation. Expose his lies. His crimes. Show the world the cracks in his perfect empire. Another man, Anton Rivers, tapped his fingers on the table. I have connections in the media. If you have proof, I can get it in front of the right people. Jackson grinned. And I know exactly where King hides his skeletons. Savannah exhaled, her heart pounding. This was it. The moment they struck the first blow. Then let's bury him, she whispered. Chapter 31, Chaos. King Mercer was untouchable until now. The moment the article dropped, the city erupted. Headlines screamed his crimes. King Mercer, a dynasty built on corruption. Ex-wife Savannah Mercer speaks out. Secrets exposed. The fall of a titan. King Mercer under investigation. The media swarmed him like vultures, his name dragged through every headline, every talk show, every news station. King didn't lose control often. But when he did, it was catastrophic. Inside his penthouse office, King slammed his fists against his desk, his face a mask of fury. How the hell did this happen? He growled, turning to his right-hand man Victor. Victor adjusted his tie. The documents, the witnesses, the recordings, everything leaked at once. Whoever's behind this planned it perfectly. King's jaw clenched. He knew who was behind this. Savannah. She wasn't just fighting back, she was dismantling him. Victor cleared his throat. There's something else. The investors are pulling out. Stock is crashing. And the board? He hesitated. King's eyes darkened. What about the board? They want you out. A deadly silence filled the room. Then King laughed. A dark, humorless sound that sent a chill down Victor's spine. They think they can dethrone me? King murmured, a dangerous gleam in his eyes. Victor swallowed hard. Sir, they have the power to do it? King slowly stood, adjusting his cuffs. Not if I burn the whole kingdom down first. Chapter 32, Revenge. Savannah watched the chaos unfold from Paige's apartment, the TV flashing images of King losing everything. She should feel victorious. She should feel relief. But all she felt was a deep, aching emptiness. Paige sat beside her, handing her a glass of wine. You did it? Savannah stared at the screen, King's furious expression frozen in the news footage. Not yet. Paige raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Savannah set her glass down. He's still standing? Paige scoffed. Save, look at him. He's a wreck. His empire is falling apart. Savannah clenched her fists. Not fast enough. Jackson's voice interrupted them. Then let's finish the job. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. There was something dangerous in his eyes. Paige frowned. Jackson, this is already going too far. No, Savannah cut in, standing. Not yet. Jackson smirked. That's what I like to hear. Savannah met his gaze. She had come too far to stop now. King Mercer had ruined her. Now she was going to ruin him. For good. Chapter 33, Expose. The city was buzzing with the scandal. King's empire was unraveling, his name smeared across every major news outlet. Savannah sat in Paige's apartment, watching as the headlines updated in real time. The latest article flashed across the screen. Ex-wife Savannah Mercer reveals shocking details of King's criminal empire. Her phone buzzed. Jackson. Everything's in motion, he said the moment she answered. Your boy Mercer is officially drowning? Savannah inhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the counter. Not yet. He's still fighting. Jackson chuckled. That's why we're about to hit him where it really hurts. Savannah's heart pounded. What do you mean? You're about to see, Jackson said. Turn on channel 7. Savannah grabbed the remote and switched the TV. The screen flickered to live coverage outside King's corporate headquarters. A crowd had gathered, protesters holding signs that read "Justice for the victims of Mercer Industries" and "Arrest King Mercer." Then the camera zoomed in. King stepped out of the building, flanked by security, his face stone cold. Reporters bombarded him with questions. Mr. Mercer, do you deny the allegations? Are you stepping down as CEO? Did you bribe officials to cover up illegal deals? For the first time, King had no answers. He looked straight at the camera, his jaw tightening, his eyes burning with fury. Savannah smirked. This was only the beginning. Chapter 34, Trapped. King slammed his office door shut, the sound echoing through the empty space. His empire was crumbling, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. He paced the room, his mind racing. Savannah. She had done this. She had turned his world upside down, and now she thought she had won. Victor entered, his expression tense. Sir, it's getting worse. More investors are pulling out. The board is? I don't give a damn about the board. King roared, slamming his fist against the desk. Victor hesitated, then stepped closer. There's one way to fix this. King turned slowly. I'm listening. Victor's voice dropped to a whisper. Take Savannah out of the equation. King's blood ran cold. Victor continued. She's the reason for all of this. If she disappears, the media will lose their fire. Without her, Jackson has no leverage. King stared at him. You're suggesting I? Victor held his gaze. Unflinching. King inhaled deeply, turning to look out the window. The city stretched before him, still his but slipping through his fingers. He closed his eyes. Then he spoke. Do it. Chapter 35, Reckoning. Savannah didn't hear the footsteps. Didn't sense the danger until it was too late. She was in the kitchen of Paige's apartment when the front door burst open. 2 men, King's men. She barely had time to react before one of them grabbed her by the arm, slamming her against the counter. Let me go, she shouted, struggling against their grip. One of them leaned in, his voice cold. Mr. Mercer says it's time for you to disappear. Panic surged through her veins. No. They started dragging her toward the door when... Gunshots. The men froze. One of them collapsed instantly. The second one spun around, reaching for his weapon. Too slow. Another shot. The man dropped. Savannah gasped, stumbling backward as a familiar figure stepped into the apartment, gun still raised. Jackson. His eyes flicked to her, filled with something sharp, something dangerous. You all right, princess? Savannah nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Jackson looked down at the bodies, then sighed. Guess Mercer really is getting desperate. Savannah swallowed hard. King had just sent men to kill her. This wasn't a game anymore. This was war. She met Jackson's gaze, her voice steady. It's time to finish this. Jackson smirked. Now that's what I like to hear. Chapter 36, Fire. Savannah's hands trembled as she wiped the blood off her shirt. The bodies of King's men were still in Paige's apartment, a grim reminder that this had gone too far. But there was no stopping now. Jackson grabbed a burner phone from his pocket and handed it to her. It's time to make the final move. Savannah took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang twice before King answered. Savannah, he said, his voice cold, dangerous. I assume you got my message. Savannah's grip tightened around the phone. Yeah. Your men are dead. A long silence. Then King chuckled. I should have known you'd find a way to survive. Savannah's stomach twisted. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't panicked. He was planning something. You should be careful, Savannah, King continued. You're playing with fire. She inhaled sharply. Then let's burn. Before he could respond, she hung up. Jackson smirked. Damn, princess. That was cold. Savannah exhaled, her hands still shaking. It was time. She turned to Jackson. Do you have the files? Jackson grinned. Every dirty secret he's ever tried to hide. Savannah grabbed her laptop and started typing. The world was about to see exactly who King Mercer really was. Within minutes, everything was uploaded. The bank statements, the bribes, the murders. And just like that, King's empire was on fire. Chapter 37, Banishment. The fallout was immediate. Savannah watched the news as reports flooded in. King Mercer wanted for fraud, corruption, and racketeering. Arrest warrant issued for business tycoon Kingston Mercer. His empire has fallen. Where is King Mercer now? Savannah's heart pounded. They had done it. Jackson sat next to her, sipping whiskey. You just made the most powerful man in the city into a fugitive. How's it feel? Savannah stared at the screen, her chest tightening. She should feel victorious. She should feel safe. But instead she felt empty. Where was King? He had vanished. No public statements. No sightings. Jackson must have noticed her expression. Don't overthink it, Savannah. He's done. Savannah exhaled. No. Not yet. Jackson frowned. What do you mean? She turned to face him, her voice steady. He's still out there. And until I see him fall for good, I won't believe it. Jackson studied her for a moment, then nodded. Then let's make sure we finish this. Chapter 38, Victory. 3 days later, Savannah got the call. She picked up, heart pounding. Hello? Paige's frantic voice came through the line. Savannah, turn on the news. Now. Savannah grabbed the remote, flipping to the first news channel she could find. The screen showed a live police raid outside one of King's private properties. Helicopters hovered above. Officers swarmed the area. And then, there he was. King was being led out in handcuffs, his face expressionless. Savannah's breath hitched. The reporter's voice filled the air. Kingston Mercer, once one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, has been arrested on multiple charges. His empire has crumbled, his assets frozen, his allies abandoning him. This marks the end of his reign. Savannah sank onto the couch, her hands covering her mouth. Jackson let out a low whistle. Well, damn. She couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Because it was over. King was finished. The battle had been long, brutal, but she had won. Tears burned at her eyes. Not of sadness. Not of regret. But of relief. She had survived. And now, she was finally free. Chapter 39, The Hollow Victory. Savannah sat in the dimly lit apartment, staring at the half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table. The television droned in the background, flashing images of King being escorted into the courthouse, shackled, defeated, a ghost of the man he once was. She should have felt something. Relief. Triumph. Peace. But instead, her chest felt tight, empty, unbearably hollow. Jackson walked in, tossing his jacket onto the couch. You see the news? Savannah didn't respond. She just stared at the amber liquid swirling in her glass, fingers wrapped too tightly around it. Jackson's smirk faltered as he studied her. All right, what's wrong? Savannah let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. What's wrong? We won, Jackson. King is gone. And I feel, she exhaled sharply. Nothing. Jackson sat across from her, leaning forward. That's because revenge isn't an ending, Savannah. It's just another chapter. She met his gaze, her voice raw. Then why does it feel like I have nothing left? Jackson didn't answer. He didn't need to. Savannah stood abruptly, grabbing the bottle and taking another swig, the burn doing nothing to numb the ache in her chest. Was this all she was now? A woman who destroyed a man only to be left with ashes? Her hands trembled. She pressed them against her temples, breathing unevenly. The room felt too small, too quiet. Her body shook, a panic she couldn't control creeping up her spine. Jackson grabbed the bottle from her, his voice sharp. Enough. Savannah clenched her jaw. Don't tell me what to do. You're spiraling. She scoffed. And what? You're my savior now? No, Jackson said. But I'm the only one who's still here. Savannah swallowed hard, turning away. Because he was right. Everyone else was gone. Her friends, her mother, Dawson. Even King in his own twisted way. She had burned everything to the ground. And now she had to figure out how to live in the ruins. Chapter 40, The Final Face-Off. 3 days passed before Savannah could force herself to leave the apartment. She stood outside the prison, arms crossed, heart pounding. Why was she here? What was she hoping to find? Closure? Redemption? Or just proof that she had truly won? Jackson leaned against the car, arms crossed. You don't have to do this. Savannah inhaled shakily. Yes, I do. She turned and walked inside, every step heavier than the last. The visiting room was empty except for one man. King sat across the glass, his hands cuffed, his once perfect suit replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his hair disheveled. But the moment she sat down he smirked. Like he had lost everything, and still knew something she didn't. Savannah picked up the phone, her grip tight. King mirrored her, his voice smooth, eerily calm. You came? Savannah's jaw clenched. I needed to see you fall. King chuckled, shaking his head. Fall? Savannah, I'm still standing. Her stomach twisted, but she refused to show weakness. You have nothing left, she said. No empire. No power. No money. King tilted his head. Then why do you still look like the one who lost? Savannah's breath hitched. Because he saw it. The emptiness in her eyes. The weight of what she had done. He had always known her better than she wanted to admit. King leaned forward, voice softer now. Did it fix you, Savannah? Did ruining me make you whole? Savannah's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes. Wanted to tell him she felt free. But the truth was? She wasn't sure. And that terrified her. King exhaled, leaning back. That's the thing about revenge, sweetheart. It doesn't give you peace. It just leaves you standing in the ashes. Savannah forced herself to stand, her legs shaky, her heart heavier than ever. You destroyed yourself, King, she whispered. Not me. She turned and walked away, but his final words lingered in the air, wrapping around her like a chain. So did you? I hope you guys subscribe to my channel. Also do like to share. Thank you. Chapter 41, Rebirth. The ocean air was cold, the waves crashing against the shore as Savannah stood at the edge of the world. It had been a week since she walked out of that prison. She had expected relief. Peace. Clarity. Instead, she had spent 7 days questioning everything. What now? For so long she had been defined by King. By his power, his destruction, his downfall. Now she had to figure out who she was without him. Jackson walked up beside her, hands stuffed in his pockets. You planning on staring at the ocean forever? Savannah smirked. Would that be so bad? Jackson chuckled. Not if you like being alone. Savannah exhaled. That's the problem. I don't know how to be anything else anymore. Jackson nodded, silent for a moment. Then, I have an offer for you. Savannah raised an eyebrow. Oh? Jackson's smirk faded. Come work with me. Savannah frowned. Work? Doing what? Jackson chuckled. You burned an empire to the ground. Now let's build something better. Savannah studied him. For the first time in years she had a choice. She could walk away. Or she could start again. And this time she would be the one in control. She turned back to the ocean, the waves roaring like a challenge. Then she smiled. I'm in. Chapter 42, Forgiveness? Savannah sat on the balcony of a small apartment she had rented under a fake name, staring at the city lights. The war was over. King was in prison. His empire had been dismantled. But peace? Peace was harder to find. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She set her glass of wine down and walked over, cautiously peeking through the peephole. Jackson. She unlocked the door, stepping aside as he walked in, his usual smirk in place. Nice place, he said, eyeing the sparsely furnished living room. It's temporary. Jackson chuckled. Everything in your life has been temporary lately. Savannah sighed, running a hand through her hair. What do you want, Jackson? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You. Savannah's stomach flipped. Jackson? Not like that, he cut in, though his smirk remained. I mean, what's next? You burned Mercer's kingdom to the ground, but what now? Are you gonna disappear? Reinvent yourself? Or are you just going to sit here drinking wine and staring at the skyline for the rest of your life? Savannah exhaled. That was the question, wasn't it? She had spent so long planning King's downfall that she hadn't thought about what came after. She swallowed. I don't know. Jackson tilted his head. Do you want my advice? Savannah looked at him. Since when do you give advice? He smirked. Since I watched you go toe-to-toe with the most dangerous man in the city and win. She folded her arms. Fine. Let's hear it. Jackson's smirk faded. Forgive him. Savannah's heart slammed against her ribs. Excuse me? I don't mean let him off the hook, Jackson said quickly. King got exactly what he deserved. But if you let the hate live in you forever, then you're still his prisoner. Savannah stared at him, her chest tightening. Could she forgive King? Could she let go of the fire that had kept her alive for so long? She didn't know. But maybe it was time to try. Chapter 43, Consequence. The prison walls were cold, but King barely noticed. He sat on the edge of his cot, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. Everything was gone. Everything. His wealth. His power. His reputation. And Savannah. He had hated her for what she had done. For betraying him. For winning. But as he sat in this tiny cell with nothing but time, the truth settled like a weight in his chest. She hadn't destroyed him. He had destroyed himself. His arrogance. His control. His need to win at all costs. Savannah had only done what he would have done in her position. And now he had nothing left but his regrets. The door buzzed. A guard appeared. Mercer. You have a visitor. King lifted his head, his heart hammering. There was only one person who would come. Savannah. Chapter 44, Legacy. The visitor's room was silent as King sat down, his hands shackled to the table. Savannah entered, her expression unreadable. She looked different. Stronger. Lighter. She sat across from him, picking up the phone. King did the same. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, King broke the silence. You came? Savannah nodded. I had to. King tilted his head. To gloat? Savannah let out a small, humorless laugh. No, King. I didn't come to gloat. He studied her, his mind racing. What did she want? Savannah exhaled. I came to say, I'm done. King frowned. Done? She met his gaze. With this? With revenge? With hate? She swallowed. It's over. And I'm walking away. A sharp pang shot through King's chest. You're letting me go? He asked, voice low. Savannah shook her head. No, King. You're already gone. You did this to yourself. King closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. He had lost. But for the first time it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like acceptance. Chapter 45, Illusion. Savannah left the prison, her heart pounding. She had thought she would feel relief. Satisfaction. Instead she felt empty. Jackson was waiting outside, leaning against his car. Well? He asked. Savannah exhaled. It's done? Jackson studied her. And? Savannah shook her head. I don't know. Jackson nodded. That's because you spent your whole life fighting him. Now you have to figure out how to live without the war. Savannah stared at the city skyline. Who was she now? For so long she had been King's wife. His enemy. His downfall. But now she was just Savannah. And she had no idea what came next. Chapter 46, A New Game Begins. Savannah sat at the cafe, stirring her coffee absently as she watched the city move around her. She was free. King was gone, his empire shattered, his name a stain on history. But the feeling of unease hadn't left her. Something was missing. A shadow fell over her table. She looked up. Jackson. He slid into the seat across from her, his usual smirk in place. You finally living, princess? Savannah exhaled. Trying? Jackson leaned back, arms draped over the chair. I've got an offer for you. Savannah narrowed her eyes. I thought I was done making deals. Jackson chuckled. Not this one. This isn't about revenge, sweetheart. This is about business. Savannah frowned. Business? Jackson set a small folder on the table and slid it toward her. You burned an empire to the ground. Now let's build something better. Savannah hesitated before picking up the folder. Inside were documents, contracts, financial reports. She looked up. What is this? Jackson's smirk faded, his voice serious. Your future. Savannah swallowed. Something about this felt too easy, too perfect. Jackson had been with her through it all, but he wasn't a hero. He was a survivor just like her. And survivors? They always had their own agendas. She closed the folder and met his gaze. Why me? Jackson tapped his fingers on the table. Because you've got fire. And fire? It either destroys or creates. Your choice. Savannah exhaled slowly. He was right. She could walk away. Disappear. Leave the world of power behind. Or, she could take control for herself. Her lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. I'm in. Jackson's smirk returned. That's my girl. But as she looked into his eyes, a quiet voice in the back of her head whispered, What game are you really playing, Jackson? Chapter 47, Finality. The sun was setting over the city, casting golden hues across the skyline as Savannah stood on the balcony of her new penthouse. It was hers. Not King's. Not borrowed power. Hers. Jackson had given her an opportunity, and she had taken it. Over the past few months, she had built something new, a consulting firm specializing in helping businesses rise from the ashes of corruption. Irony at its finest. She had spent so long tearing down an empire that she never imagined she'd be part of building one. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to find Paige standing there, holding a bottle of champagne. You did it, Paige said, stepping inside. Savannah smirked. Did what? Proved everyone wrong. Paige set the bottle down. You're not just King Mercer's ex-wife. You're your own damn powerhouse. Savannah exhaled. She still wasn't used to hearing that. Paige popped the bottle, pouring 2 glasses. So what's next? Savannah lifted her glass, the weight of the past finally slipping from her shoulders. Whatever the hell I want. Paige grinned. Now that's the Savannah I know. They clinked glasses, laughter filling the air. Savannah took a sip, letting the warmth spread through her. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting to survive. She was just living. But as she turned back to the skyline, something nagged at her. Jackson had been too quick to set her up in this new world. Too prepared. She set her glass down and reached for her phone, staring at Jackson's last text. Jackson, it's all falling into place. See you soon, princess. Her stomach twisted. Something about those words didn't sit right. She shook the thought away. She had won. Hadn't she? Chapter 48, Ashes and Kings. The prison walls were quieter at night. King sat in his cell, his hands folded on the table. His mind was clearer than it had been in months. He had spent weeks raging against his downfall. Against Savannah. Against his own failures. But now he felt nothing. There was no empire left to fight for. No reputation left to salvage. For the first time in his life he had lost. Completely. The guard tapped on the bars. Mercer. You've got mail. King took the envelope and opened it slowly. Inside was a single note. Some kings build empires. Others burn. You were the latter. King let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Savannah had won. And he had no choice but to accept it. He folded the note and placed it in his pocket. This was the end. Or so she thought. Across the city, Jackson sat in a dark office, flipping through a file. Inside were documents, old business records, offshore accounts, names of powerful men who once stood with King. Men who were still very much in the game. He smirked, pulling out his phone. The line rang twice before connecting. A deep voice spoke. Is it done? Jackson took a slow sip of whiskey. She thinks so. The voice chuckled. And the girl? Jackson's smirk widened. Exactly where we need her. He leaned back in his chair, watching the city lights flicker outside. Savannah had burned King's empire to the ground. But now Jackson was about to build his own. Chapter 49, Rebirth. Savannah walked through the grand lobby of her office building, heels clicking against the marble floor. Employees greeted her with respectful nods, her presence commanding the space. She had built this. From nothing. From ruin. From fire. She no longer carried the weight of revenge. She no longer looked over her shoulder, waiting for King to strike. Because she had won. And in winning she had finally found herself. Jackson met her at the elevators, smirking as usual. Ready for your first major client? Savannah took a breath. Always. As the elevator doors closed, she allowed herself a small smile. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Chapter 50, The End. Savannah sat by the ocean, the waves crashing gently against the shore. For the first time in years there was no war left to fight. She had spent so much time defining herself by revenge, by survival, by king. But now she was just Savannah. A woman who had been broken, beaten, and underestimated, but never destroyed. A woman who had burned down a kingdom, only to build something even greater from the ashes. The wind carried a whisper of the past, but she didn't flinch. The past was over. The war was over. And for the first time in her life, Savannah Mercer was finally, truly free. The ultimate question: was it worth it? Savannah Mercer burned a kingdom to the ground, but did she truly win? Or did she just build another empire, one step away from crumbling? What do you think? Was her revenge justified? Or did she become the very thing she hated? Drop a comment below. Tell me, if you were in Savannah's place, would you have walked away? Or would you have done exactly what she did? Before you go, don't be that 91%. The real ones support great stories, and I see you reading but not subscribing. If you love twists, betrayals, and jaw-dropping endings, then hit like, comment, and subscribe right now. Because trust me, Savannah's story might be over, but what if I told you this was only the beginning? Stay tuned. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The end.